Good evening. Hi. Thank you so much for, first of all, doing this entire program. I'm so appreciative, and I hope you found it valuable. And we'll talk about that later on at the end of tonight's session. But for now, we're going to kick it off. This is the last night, of course. It is the budget session. We're going to have more city councilors coming in to help with this eventually, but we're going to provide a foundational basis on property taxes and the city's revenue sources and our budget from Dale Bickle, CAO, and Jessica Miller, who is our, property tax, constituent services, legislative. You do everything, so yeah, we couldn't do it without her. So we're going to have a presentation first, and we'll have about probably 40 minutes or so, including hopefully a few questions at the end. But then we will end that, and we're going to go into the exercise that we'll introduce for you. We're probably not going to take a break. I'll just let you know right now. So if you need to use the restroom, just go off, use it, and come back, because we want to be able to use our time tonight. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dale and Jessica.
Hello everyone, Dale Bickle again. Nice to see you all. I hope you've been enjoying Citizens Academy, and I'm sorry that they've saved the worst for last here. And I'll see if I can advance the slides. You want to hit that on the computer? Okay, thanks. You want me to, should I use this? Is that better? Thanks. Great. Okay, so I'm going to spend the first part of this talking about Montana's property tax system, and then get into Missoula specifically. And so this is, as I think all of you are aware, we are from local government perspective, we're a very property tax dependent state. And this is a chart that shows how dependent Montana is for property taxes for local governments versus the national average. So all U.S. local governments on the left, that's how Montana compares to the rest of our peers across the country. 96% reliant on property taxes. Now there's going to be a little bit of a disconnect. You'll see in some of these things that we can explain later. But as a general rule, substantially all of our money that we are using is borne by property taxpayers. And it's also important, and this is a big, there's big transitions happening in our property tax system today that you may have read about in all of the kind of property tax controversies happening. It's actually who pays property taxes, and that's been changing over quite a period of time, and that's for a lot of different reasons. But you can see in 1999, this is Missoula County, right? City. 42.9% of the tax base was actually residential. Last year, it was 65%. And so you can see the changes between different types of property for a lot of different reasons. It's like business equipment tax and central assessed. Those are actually policy decisions that were made by the legislature to decrease those. Those actually move taxes and shift taxes to commercial and residential. But there are other factors too, just the change in our economy. We're much less reliant on big industrial taxpayers and those things as those happen. And so, but that shift is happening. And you got a question in that.
I did, if I could interrupt. Rental taxes on rental properties, do they fall into residential or commercial?
Typically residential.
Okay.
Except for multifamily.
Yeah, the big ones, the big one, yeah, fourplex and more. So, are taxed at commercial rates. Yeah.
And am I not mistaken, but if there is like one pie, and if residential goes up, something else goes down.
Yes.
So that's why commercial is paying less than residential, because our legislature said, they have a bigger lobby, and they can go and say, and plead their case, and if their taxes go down, somebody else's have to go up.
Yeah, so that pie is, you think of that pie as the same, and there's tax shifts happening. Generally, and there are absolute policy decisions that you're describing that the legislature makes that change that. It's also economic factors and those things as well. But that shift is, and it's pretty, it's substantial, right, over this this time period. So, one thing we like to argue here too is that the city has been the long proponents of trying to have a local option tourist tax. And one of the reasons is that we need to diversify our revenues, like in that first slide I showed. And there's also any kind of sales tax. There's always also a concern about regressivity. But what this chart shows, and it's from the Montana Budget and Policy Center, is that property taxes are actually the most regressive tax that we have. I mean, it is not tied to ability to pay whatsoever. And so you can see that you can see that the lowest 20% have a higher contribution of property taxes, even if you're a renter, to the property tax burden. And that just, and you can see that line is how regressive that is. Now, the legislature is happening, and there are a lot of, and property taxes, really for the first time in a long time, are central to the conversations they're having in Helena. And I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on each of these items, and if you go through the next couple slides, just back and forth a little bit, there's a ton of stuff happening that is out there. But I'm going to talk in general about the mechanisms of reform that the legislature is considering in a few different buckets. One is the tax shift piece that you had raised, and there's competing packages from both sides. The Republicans and the Democrats each have a different bill that is that's introducing a homestead exemption, or I should say reintroducing a homestead exemption that hasn't been there in the past. And what that does is, it exempts a certain amount of property taxes for the residents, so that the first $100,000 of value wouldn't be taxable, and those types of things. And they're doing mechanisms to do that. Both packages also do on the commercial side too. If you think of that chart, so one of the issues with that, and when preparing for your tax bills, it'll provide relief. But one of the issues is in a tax shift, there has to be a loser in order to get some winners. There are really big losers in this one. So what they're proposing isn't going to propose a major reform, I don't think. But it's also part of it. There will be residential. There would be some relief there too. So it is, but it's not significant. The other piece is often called a circuit breaker. There is a bill in the legislature that would tie it to tie property tax relief to your income levels, and it comes as an income tax credit. Now there is a circuit breaker in law now, which is the elderly homeowner and renter credit. Some of you may be familiar with that. That's essentially a circuit breaker. If you meet certain criteria, you get a tax break based on your property taxes. So there's a bill to expand that. That one's pretty meaningful. It's expensive for the state because they have to pay it with income tax. But that is actually, and it's also one of the most fair ways to do it because it's really income based and really gets to those types of things. SB 90 is up there. This is really the state's first foray into providing property tax relief through a tourist-oriented tax. This takes the portion of the current bed tax that is given to the state general fund and reallocates it to property tax relief. Right now, the way the bill is, if your property has an assessed value of $1 million or less, you get $250 annually on property tax relief. So we're still working on that bill. There are 4 properties in Missoula that are worth $1 million of assessed value. If you remember, assessed value lags market, true market value, and all those things. So there's an opportunity if we can lower that amount and get more meaningful property tax relief there. So those are the 3 kind of main ways that are happening, and we're close. We're working hard and watching, and it's actually there's going to be some progress. Hopefully it gets to be meaningful. So after that explanation, Jessica's going to talk about the specific mechanics of the tax bills and how that works.
So there are a couple of handouts on your desk. And I will get these and the presentation to Kalina so that she can make sure and get that stuff out to you guys as well. I can get that done before the meeting. So let's see. So on here we have some general property tax information, places to find tax bills. The next slide is going to go into the tax bill a little bit, which you also have there because it's very hard to read up here. This slide here with the appraisal notices, this isn't something that will go to renters, this does go to the property owner, but the next slide with the tax bills, those are things that renters can look up on their property that they occupy as well and see what the property taxes are on that. So in odd numbered years, all residential properties are reevaluated, and so that happened, or the notices come out in odd numbered years. So that happened 2 years ago. There was a lot of news about it because there was such a jump statewide of about 20% in those appraised values, and so that is one of those things that accounts for the tax shift, in addition to the policy things like reducing business class, business tax and things like that. So as our property values increase, our all residential properties in Montana are valued on their actual market value. Now, market value, as Gail said, does lag behind. So this bill, or this notice here, will be going out in June to property owners, and it shows what was the previous assessed value and what is the new assessed value. And so that'll be the change. The notices that went out in 2023 were a value set as of January 2022. So these ones that are going to come out this June are going to be valued as of January 2024. So it is a little bit behind. This won't be exactly the same number that you see if you look it up on your Zillow estimate or something like that. This other number here, the estimated general taxes, this is where this is very inaccurate and makes people kind of freak out a little bit because we're capped on how much we can raise taxes each year. Schools are all the funding things are the same. So this is if we did not change our taxation levels at all, at your new value, this is how high your taxes would be. But cities and counties have to lower our mill rates if our values go up a lot. So that's a number that people kind of panic about a little bit, but it's typically going to be less than that. Again, these will come out in June. Property owners have 30 days to challenge that. In 2023, the Department of Revenue did a really great job educating on this, and I hope that they will as well this year. They had town halls all over the state, and they had some available virtually as well. But this is one of the big factors that determines your property value. So all of that is on the very first link on this handout, general property tax information. We have some information there from the city, and we also have links on that page on how to protest, and that notice will have that as well. So this is what the property tax bill looks like. This is for a home that's near the median value. I did print off a 2025 one. So it's broken up into sections here. The top portion of there you see gets carried down to that second line where it says District 1.1. Again, this is something that folks can look up, and that link is on this handout as well. This is something folks can look up regardless of whether this is whether you're the owner or the renter. You can look it up if you're a renter as well. This is all public information. So you can see how much of those taxes go to the city, and that top section is carried down to that middle line. The next section that is highlighted in what appears to be the same color, but I don't think actually is. So that middle section, those are the special assessments. So those are the city road and park districts are considered special assessments instead of in that top section there. And it's also things like the urban transportation or special assessments. So yeah, so those are things, it's got Fort Missoula in there. Some folks may have SIDs or lighting districts in that section as well. We've also got water quality district and other things like that. One more. There you go. Okay, so that section down at the bottom there, that was what was on the previous slide there, that assessed value that comes from the state. So what they're taking is they're taking that market value, they're multiplying it by the assessment code that's in state law, which for residential is 1.35% of the market value in order to get the taxable value. And then it's the taxable value that is multiplied by the number of mills that the cities and counties levy. So you can go one more. There you go. So yes, we've got that taxable value that came from the state times the total number of mills that were levied, and that gets us to our taxable value. So you can see how the two kind of play together there between the state and the local governments, and that's why it's a shared problem with everybody, yes.
What is a mill exactly?
A mill is 1/1000th of the value of property in Missoula. It's something that I finally understand and can never explain. I don't know if Mr. Bickle can do better. And I think
I mean, it's really, I mean, in simple terms, it's the tax rate, right? It's how it's applied, and it's applied in a way that makes the math just a little harder to understand. But you know, you think about, I mean, the original Latin mill is 1,000 or 1,000, and so it's really a percent, but it's to another digit, and so. The mill rate of say that was up there 772 is actually like it's 77.2% of your taxable value. If that's a way to think about that. But they just apply the mill rate as that standard that was created 100 years ago and made it hard to explain. Yeah.
I know it's hard to explain, but can a mill rate actually be converted to a dollar value? And is it the same dollar value for every property in the city?
Well, not exactly, because you have to think of it as that it's the same rate is applied to every property within the city, but every property has a different value, and so that rate, but it's applied consistently across every single property. Yes. And for every jurisdiction. That makes sense.
So
yeah.
a mill can have a different dollar value, not rate, but it can have a different dollar value for every property.
Yes, because it's a rate. Now, so the mill value from my perspective, you'll see that in your budget exercise, that there is a mill value that you're using as when you exercise when you're on city council, and you can determine. So 1 mill, for example, in your exercise raises about $150,000, and that's so when you say there's a value of a mill from the government's perspective, that mill raises that amount of dollars, and that is that's a similar to it. I mean, that is about what the real mill value is. So when you look at a mill value as $1, if it's that 1 mill rate applied to all properties, how much does that generate? $150,000 in your exercise. Yeah.
So, because you have this 772 times, and then you divide by, is it the same thing as saying the taxable value, basically 72% of the taxable value?
Yes.
72% is applied to everyone?
Yes.
Okay.
Is that right? Thank you for being very clear. I struggle with that sometimes.
it's just just the emphasis of this is really that number in the lower corner. So, every property in this taxing district 1.1 in the city of Missoula has 772 mills levied on it. The question is, how much is that property worth that it's multiplied by? So if this was a vacant lot that was worth, probably $100,000 for a vacant lot these days, but if it was lower than that, then it wouldn't be 772 times 5,685, it would be 772 times, 1,200 or something like that. So that's really where the big change comes in.
Awesome. Just kind of looking under the local schools, there's 3 transfer
transportation cost?
That would be a question for the school district.
I seem repetitive and wanted clarity, thank you.
Yeah.
I've never had a sense of what a mill levy actually is. Do they ever go away?
No.
It keeps just increasing? Is a voter approved something that we just keep getting more and more mill levies?
So there are a couple of different types of mill levies. One is, for example, in 2024, we just passed the fire levy. That one is a specific number of mills, so that's 35 mills. And so that number will remain consistent throughout the life of that, unless at some point, we don't need to levy that whole thing, so we can levy up to 35 mills for the fire levy each year. Then there are the mills where we can only increase it.
Yeah, so and there's different, there's different limitations for the different types of revenue in here. So for example, our general fund, which is the primary funding piece for the city operations, that is actually, the limitation is based on a dollar amount. We're allowed to levy the same dollar amount we received in the prior year, plus half of the rate of inflation, plus the value of new growth. So by definition in the law, if there's no growth, by definition we're actually losing ground every year. And then with growth, it actually growth doesn't pay for itself. So as you see all of the growth that's happening around the city, it actually doesn't generate enough taxes to cover the actual new service provisions that happen. So we get in this vicious cycle. It's one of the reasons we are really trying to lobby for a more diverse set of revenues rather than just property taxes, because it's just the system just doesn't work. So that's part of that. Sorry for the editorializing, but yeah.
Is the taxable value the whole value of the property, or is it a certain amount of the value?
So it's the assessed value is the amount that is supposed to be market value. There is a tax rate that is applied to that to get the taxable value, and the tax rate is somewhere in the neighborhood of like 1.8% for no, I'm not.
Sorry, grab the microphone away here. So each property tax or each property class has a different value. So you see down at the bottom there, the market value is the actual market value. And then to get the taxable value, they multiply that by a rate that is set by the state legislature. And so for residential properties, that is 1.35%. And then commercial properties is 1.4 times 1.35%, which is about 1.8 or 1.89, somewhere around in there. And so those are the things that the legislature really controls as far as, the percent of residential value that is market, that is taxable is 1.35. That's what the legislature sets. And they can change that up and down over the years.
So it's close. But there are levies that do drop off. So, for example, bonds, right? So the city has our aquatics bonds are the last remaining bonds that expire. I think FY26 is the last year, and those levies will actually drop off. So it just kind of depends on the situation. Yeah.
So you said that the general fund is set by what was the previous year, plus half the rate of inflation, plus growth. Is that growth rate? You said that growth doesn't pay for the services provided to the areas. Is that different where you live in a county versus the city? Like, so does the county have a different growth than the city? Or how's that work between the different jurisdictions?
It's the same system for the city and county, so they say they play by the same rules, and yes, typically it is the same, and that's why you see ballot initiatives for aspects of things, because that's essentially the governing body needs the.
So then, what covers the difference in the general fund? If we're not, the growth doesn't cover it and we only get half the inflation, how do we cover the extra part of that general fund for the operational side?
That is the $4 million question that came up this week. And so there are a number of other things that we we look forward to do. We've had in the last few years we've had federal recovery dollars that we're able to close the gap. We've used Missoula Redevelopment Agency remittances to help close those gaps. We reduced the general fund, certain line items as the general fund by $1 million last year. I mean, so all of those tools are the things we use to try to keep the budget balanced. So, yeah.
I'm going to show my ignorance here, but I'm not getting my head around it. When you talk about growth, what are you talking about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean new tax-based construction. Or annexation. It's largely construction. When somebody builds a new house, that tax, those come in, and we're allowed to increase our budget based on the value of that property.
Okay, so it's the new stuff that's being built really isn't paying its way.
No, it doesn't. So
Is that your opinion or is that a fact?
Well, it's a fact. I mean, it is just part of the level of service. Now, there's, and I mean, it's somewhat subjective because the governing body sets the level of service that that's oversimplified as well. But typically the governing body, the city council actually sets the budget and therefore sets the level of service that we want for our police and fire and all those things. Those are all based on kind of best practices that we have, and we actually control that. We control the number of police officers. There's a lot of services we provide that we don't control. So municipal court is a good example. They have speedy trial requirements and certain requirements that they have to be able to act in a certain way. We are required by law to provide enough resources for that operation to meet that criteria. So you can't stop doing municipal court, and you can't actually say, well, we're only going to do enough, we're just going to make everybody wait 2 years to get through the process. So those are the kind of balancing acts we have to try to do, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So, sorry, so this is a dumb example, so bear with me for a second. So if the city of Missoula annexes East Missoula, that goes to the growth of the city of Missoula, right?
Yes.
But does that decrement from the growth of the county of Missoula?
Partially. So for the majority of the county's property taxes, they are inside the city limits and outside the city limits.
Okay.
And so if you see your property tax bill, you'll see, if you're still in the city, you'll see the county portion. What you don't see as a city resident is the road and health portion. Those are outside the city limits only. So if East Missoula was annexed, the county only loses the road and health portion. They still continue to collect the most of their mill levies. But that said, those are all for services that they provide inside to all tax residents, clerk recorder's office, elections, all of those things. So. Okay, so moving on to property tax distribution. This is the city of Missoula, and where all of so in that big property tax bill in all the jurisdictions, this is the allocation of where all of those dollars go. So you can see that the city has historically been about a third. We're above that now based on the new fire initiative. Schools are another third, and then the special districts such as Mountain Line and the county are that other third. This is a busy chart, but I think it's important. We'll spend a little time on it. This tries to show the functions that are property tax funded versus the ones that are funded by other methods like charges for services and whatnot. So you see the green are all of the activities that are funded through the general fund and subject to that property tax limitation I mentioned earlier. And you can see, so some of our biggest departments, police and fire, are that. Now fire's got their own another special levy that's helping with that now too. But all of those are under our general fund. Park district and road district are those special districts that Jessica talked about a little bit on the tax bill. They are calculated in the same manner as Our general fund property taxes, their limitation isn't the amount that was assessed in the prior years, it's limited by the use. So you only can use it for road and parks purposes. And so you'll see where those are put in here in kind of narrow places. And then the gray are places that are largely funded by user fees. So our utilities, water, wastewater, stormwater are all funded by utility bills. Parking commission is obviously parking revenues. And a lot of our, like aquatics, for example, is funded by, the operations are funded by fees. And so that's how I wanted to demonstrate that, out of our $150 million budget, about $100 million of it is related to as property tax based. The other parts are those other departments, like they are utilities. So this breaks out just our property tax funded operations, or no, it doesn't. This is where all of our revenues come from, and this is focusing on our big property tax funded activities, so general fund, road district, and park district. And you can see that about half of it is road and park assessments and property taxes, and then we have all of these other fees that are help, intergovernmental revenues is largely grants and some state monies that we get. Transfers in is partially property taxes as well, but so you can see that we are, how reliant we are in that.
So the very first slide you showed, like the majority of Montana is funded by property taxes, but that's not necessarily the case for the city.
That's right, and so that's that. Yeah. So we are, we are able to be more diverse, especially being a big urban center, and we have some ability to do some of these things that are.
That first slide was specifically. So the very first slide was specifically tax revenue. So that did not include any fees for anybody or anything like that. So other states have a lot of revenue from sales tax and other types of taxes. So that one was specifically to tax revenue.
Thank you. So this is where specifically the property tax dollars go here, and you can see that following similar to where the revenues came from. Half of this is police and fire, our public safety functions, always one of our top priorities. So that half of the property taxes go there, and then everything else you'll see in the so between public works and mobility, which is really their streets division. Their utilities are separate. Parks, central services, and admin includes all of our kind of back house, HR, finance. Attorneys, all of those things. Well, partially attorneys, you see. So the prosecutors are in the municipal court piece, planning services. This is talking about the budget process that we are kind of getting ready to start up in earnest. Under our strong mayor form of government is our original conversation. The mayor's responsibility for presenting an executive budget for approval by council. And so that process will be kicking off soon, and that shows the schedule there. We've changed it around a little bit, but Mayor Davis has changed the process a little bit. And so what happens now is departmental presentations will be made this spring, and then in July the mayor will make her budget presentation. It used to be that it was presented and then the department presentations happened. This gives the mayor a better opportunity to work with council members and public related to final decisions after the presentations have been made. Yeah.
Do you need to know what the legislature decides about taxes before you finalize the budget for the city?
Yeah, and it's super annoying because they don't give us our property tax numbers until the first Monday in August. Our fiscal year starts July 1st. So we have this, so we start the year working on estimates. And, you know, we're hoping that we're right, but that's it. We don't actually get our numbers until, you know, a couple of months into the season. And so we, you know, so that we'll, you know, we get the numbers first Monday in August. We cross our fingers that we were right in our estimates, otherwise we have to kind of start over. And then we have to adopt by the end of August. One thing that we've had, you know, inflation has been a big piece. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, so does that mean, like in the last 2 years when the governor has given us a rebate, property tax rebate, does that mean that when it came to that August time, you got everything you wanted because they had more than they needed, and then they gave us back some of the extra, or did you still have to fight to get what you want or reduce some services because of what they said you were going to get?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the property tax rebate that the governor did in the last legislature was for residents, so we didn't get, you know, the local governments didn't see any of that, and you know, and so you could, and that was part of a one-time relief.
So that had nothing to do with it. They had more money
that
they were able to give you all you wanted and everybody else, and they had that.
No, they used to, they had a $2.5 billion surplus, and how I always tried to recommend the mayor, like, look at the state. They charged way more in taxes than they need. We should do that. But she doesn't, she's not interested in that.
No, she doesn't want to do that.
Sorry for that. You know, so at top of everyone's minds is cost of living and increases, and the same thing for us. You know, there's a lot of error out there that our expenses should be in line with national inflation, except that a lot of our costs really outpace inflation. These are a couple of examples of what happened to us. On, you know, a fire truck purchase, 53% since 2020. You guys probably saw a really cool Type 1, their standard structured engine. Those are $1 million now. And I think when I started with the city, they were like $250,000, $300,000. So it's incredible the level of some of the costs that we have incurred. You can see just some of the costs that that we've been dealing with here in the fairly short term.
I mean, do they just treat us like the military? I mean, $1 million for a fire truck? I mean, does it even need to be manned, or can it just go and put fires out by itself? That's a lot of money.
My joke is I watched that show 911, and they got one cop and one firefighter show up to these things. Like, why can't we do that? So these next slides are really interesting. Well, I mean, is this the only one we got on this? No.
This is the only.
Okay. Yeah, we simplified this. So. You know, there's also a lot of talk about how we compare to other cities around the state, and because everybody uses different tools and has different revenues. I mean, it's really a lot property based. But what we've done in the last few years is talk about our revenues and our taxes in terms of revenue per capita. We think that is a fair measure to say, all right, how much we charge per person. And we have, you know, it's readily available. Population estimates are done by, you know, Census Bureau data, so it's, you know, should be fairly consistent application. And we think that's kind of a fair way to do it. And you can see that we're not, I mean, we're on the high end of our peers, but we're not like crazy like people would suggest Missoula is often. We're kind of, you know, right in there. And the other thing that is important to point out is that, you know, I think you've heard that Missoula has the highest property taxes in the state. Well, on this chart, that is true because we have among the lowest district charges in the state. Our Roden Park district, Missoula was late to the dance on districts. It was always property tax important. So that's what this slide is intended to show, is that, you know, we are, you know, pretty much in line with our peers on a revenue per capita basis. And when you look at the mix, you can't exclude the districts. So you know, so Bozeman and Billings both have arterial and collector districts. They're not assessed as property taxes. They actually use a different basis of allocation. You know, they use a frontage of a property or lot size, so it's not actually tied to the value. But that's how we try to make this a fair presentation. Is like total revenue divided by the number of people, and so that's what Missoula stacks up against some of our peer cities in Montana. Yeah.
Me again. The good news is property tax is one of the few good tax deductions that we have at the end of the year. But aren't we, am I mistaken, aren't we like a resource-rich state with lumber and coal going away and those kinds of things? And are we subsidized by that in any way?
Like Alaska and the oil.
Well,
like Alaska.
You know, the city of Missoula really isn't, and I think that goes to kind of changes in the economy. You know, so we had a really tragic news this year in Missoula County of our 2 remaining mills closing, I mean, I'm no expert in how that industry works, but you know, our property tax system was actually designed around big industrial payers like that, really asset-heavy companies like Smurfit Stone or Champion and all of those things. And as our economy has changed, that tax base isn't there, right? And so that shifts it to residential, and there just hasn't been any meaningful tax reform to acknowledge our different economy.
If the city of Missoula is allowed to have an option tax, is that something like, whether it's a gas tax or a tourist tax, is that something you would want to take advantage of? And which one, I mean, what would you tax?
Well, we've been long advocates of a local, what we would call a local option tourist tax, and it's really it's a local option sales tax that's targeted to tourist-oriented activities like hotels, rental cars, liquor by the glass, restaurants. I mean, some locals would pay it, and it's really, we see success in Montana. So some of our resort communities, I think, I can't remember the exact population limit, but like communities of less than 5,000 that have an economy that's tourist-based and certain criteria can do this. So City of Whitefish has been grandfathered in. They have, we did a case study with them a few years ago. They have a local option sales tax. And what they do up there is they put the rebate right on your tax bill, so you know how much you get. And what they've said is they've been passing those 70+% of the vote. I mean, everybody's favorite tax is one that someone else pays, right? But what they see is like I'm getting way more of a rebate on my property taxes than the sales tax I'm paying. And those are the types of things, and they've got great resources for new infrastructure and those things. But that resort tax model in Montana we think is a good one, and we've consistently been working on those types of things.
Can I chime in real quick, Dale? Sorry, this is like my thing that I was. The thing that is nice about a local option sale. Oh, hi, Stacey Anderson, City Council. Sorry, this is like the thing I spent all my campaigning on. The thing that I like about a local option sales tax, which I think is very different than just the state imposing a sales tax generally, is that it gives the communities the opportunity to engage with its citizens to say, this is what we're going to tax. Car rentals, alcohol purchase in restaurants, whatever we think is a good mix. And put it to the voters and say, these are the things we're planning on taxing, these are the things, this is how much, and this is what we plan on doing with the money. And then every 10 years, you need to re-engage with your citizens to re-up that. And Whitefish, as an example, over time has changed what it is that they have done with that money. They built themselves a lovely new city hall, that's now done. They are now putting more money into affordable housing. So the state just saying, okay, now we are going to be one of the, there are only 5 states in the entire country that do not have a sales tax. We are one of them. And the state saying, okay, everything's going to be taxed at 3%, except for, a handful of goods. No one has any say in that. Whereas local option really, I think, forces communities to engage in what is best for them and what are their unique individual needs. And I always think that that's a better way to run the railroad. So.
Well said.
And one thing I would say too is we believe our residents want it too. We recently did a resident survey, and it was 71% strongly support local option tourist tax.
Yeah, so
Let's do
went over the holidays and went, holy moly, when we got our hotel bill, it was 4 pages long and every $1.02, 2 3, and I'm like, this is what we need to do. And it's, even though I didn't have my local ID, right, because it's for locals, I paid those taxes gratefully because I was a tourist, and I'm like, where are we in Missoula to roll out the same option? It's amazing what they've done with that.
State has to allow it.
The legislature will not let us.
Okay, that's right.
Well,
No, that's good, yeah.
On the legislature side, which again, I'll send these to Kalina and have her send them up, there is one bill that is still active that would allow us to do that. So it hasn't died yet, but we've still got 45 days to go.
What's the bill number?
489.
We can call them.
489, yep.
489?
Yeah.
So my question is, because I'm an anti-sales tax, you get one city tax, and then later on the state does put in a sales tax. We're paying for both. And then we pay for when we go out, we pay the alcohol tax. You know, when I have to take my car into the shop, I pay the rental car tax. I mean, and I still pay the property tax. So I'm not getting any break in any of these bills.
Well, 489, for example, is a bill that 100% of the proceeds has to go to property tax relief, and that's the piece that's different. Is that it isn't about raising more revenue. It is about creating more fairness in the tax system.
But there's income limits. There's approval, like HB 321. I'm going to lose my family cabin because it's a second home. I mean, there's property tax, there's blaming the other, but the other is someone who's been here 6 generations. So I understand about wanting to target and blame, someone else to pay it, but at a certain point, we're going to be very expensive to come and visit too if you have a how many page hotel bill. Because at the end of it, when they go to do an estimate on how much it is to stay or how to rent, they're going to still, what's the total before I choose it? I mean, it all adds up.
It all adds up. That's absolutely correct. Yeah.
So I'm doing taxes right now, so it's very personal.
What's their argument? Why are they so against it?
I still have not heard a convincing argument. They just don't like it because every bill, every session has been to put it on the ballot for our communities. It would let us put it on the ballot for you all to make that decision. And it just, I've listened to some of the hearings over the years, and there's kind of they might charge me more on my Carhartts. What if they decide to charge on Carhartts, and then the whole thing falls apart? I mean, it's just, it's a very, I haven't heard a good reason.
Well, it almost sounds like you're saying it's people that don't trust that you would govern your local tax well, as opposed to people that say, oh, no, that's the wrong way we should tax our state population, we should tax it.
Right. Yeah, as Stacy said, that bill would, it would go on the ballot to say we are charging on these things. So like Whitefish, for example, I mean, they charge on just about everything because they're so heavily tourist based. Here in Missoula, when we've talked about it, it would probably be, hotels, dining out, liquor by the glass, some of those things that, yes, we use them, but the tourists who are coming here use them a lot as well. And the last analysis that I did based on the Institute of Tourism and Recreation Research data, they actually survey people visiting Montana from out of state. And based on that number, based on their data, a 4% tax on those types of items would generate about $3 million in revenue for the city. People from out of state, that doesn't even include people who are coming here from other communities.
It's more expensive in San Francisco.
What's getting antsy?
You have a couple more slides.
No, I think the slideshow's over. Is that right?
This one just talks about.
Oh, yeah. So this one is really quick. So the blue portions of this is the total tax base. The dark portions at the bottom that are hard to see is actually is the amount we're getting from new growth. And so really it's a pretty incremental portion of our new revenues each year that are actually coming from newly taxable value, that new construction. Oh, and finally, what was that one before?
This is where the property tax increase went.
Oh, yeah, I'll do this in 10 seconds. So this is where, just what Jessica said, this is we talk about every year, where does the actual property tax increase go, not just all of it. And you can see half of it there is actually just staff cost of living increases every year. And most of that is in our police and fire. Then you can see the smaller bits that are for other activities, but it's just, there's this, our growth in our taxes just isn't providing a lot of new revenue. And finally, just wanted to just highlight this slide is this is an example from our last year's budget, and it's a program inventory. Mayor Davis is moving us towards a priority-based budget. Part of that is looking at we inventoried all of our programs and started collecting real metrics and the ones that we are using to make management decisions out of. And so these are the examples we're using to. This is an example of fire. Obviously, is very data-driven, and so we are working on that for all of our programs and to help really budget around our priorities.
Okay, so we're going to switch gears. Thank you. Thanks, Dale and Jessica. This is highly complicated, and they synthesized it down, and amazing questions, best questions I've ever heard so far with this program, so A+ there. There's a lot more questions that we could be answering and going into, but we're going to switch gears. I will say one thing. There is a long cultural history of anti-sales tax in Montana. I grew up with that. We're not a sales tax state. There were some initiatives in the 80s that got shot down. There were some political careers at the state level that got killed because they were trying to go in that direction. But now it's 2025, and a lot of the industries that our prior taxation system was based on are not nearly as big in Montana. And I think it's if I were Governor Gianforte, I would take $100 grand and have a couple different economics analysts who are strong in tax go through, look at our economy, look at Montana, come up with some options and start the discussion there. But it doesn't happen that way, and I'm king of the world, so that's where we are. But huge topic. So what we're going to do is the budget exercise now. I'm just going to talk through this a little bit. You've got documents that I think you were able to look at some of them ahead of time, and we're going to, after I talk through it, we'll give you the documents. But I'm going to talk through it first. So this green sheet talks about what the current budget is, all right, for each department, and there's personnel and services or supplies. Sometimes we contract out for services, or we have to buy supplies. We've simplified all of this down quite a bit. So the baseline increase, for example, for what's a good department? For City Attorney's Office, $1.9 million in personnel. We are allocating a 3% increase in salaries based on all of the average of our collective bargaining units. Okay, we've simplified it. We've got the numbers there. It's going to be $1.9 million in personnel, $60,000 in that baseline increase of 3%. So $1.96 million is the city attorney's basic budget, and then they've got a little bit of supply, professional purchase services, and other categories. So when you look at this green sheet, you can look at each department, and you're going to see what the current year's budget is, and then what the 3% increase is for personnel, and what the proposed budget is for this next year. And that's what we're going to be working on. I will note
we have not even gone into inflation for supplies. We're just carrying it over. We're just simplifying that. So down at the bottom on this, I think the third sheet in, it's all summarized. Total general fund. Let's get my glasses on. We totaled it for you. Total general fund, $59,155,000 for last year. Your 3% baseline increase, basically cost of living adjustment, $1.56 million. So your new general fund number is $60.715 million. That's just the status quo, all right? If you go to the back page then, so that was the general fund. I will reference this later, but our general fund is capped. We can only increase it a certain amount per state law. If you go to the back page, you're gonna see road district and park district. All right, and the same thing, 3% increase in personnel, so you can see the current year budget and then the future budget in those columns. So road district, 7.8 million, 200,000 increase, getting it up to 8 million. Parks district, 8.95 million, 200,000 increase, getting it up to 9.15 million. And these are not capped, all right? However, when we get to the new asks, the new requests, if it is, we will go through those. There are certain things that can be funded in the road and park districts. Guess what it is? Roads and parks. If it's something different, it has to come from the general fund. Okay, oops, the next thing is the revenue sheet. This is the money the city will get. So we've got 2025, we received revenue that came in for the general fund, $58.5 million. Road district, $7.75 million. Park district, $6.8 million. And then we've got the tax base increase, that's the newly taxable income. In other words, somebody builds a new house on a vacant lot, that's going to be additional income. That's going to be additional revenue. If somebody remodels their house and makes it really fancy, the tax base goes up. All right, so newly taxable. That's what that middle column is. So you can. I'm not going to go through the numbers again, but you can see for FY 2026, those are the after we calculate in the newly taxable. This is what you have to work with. Now remember, if you're going to be raising taxes, you can raise road district or park district taxes. They are not capped, but the general fund is capped. And that equation is in the documents. I won't go through it, but it's in there. So this sheet just gives you some background information. I won't go through all of it, but it explains a lot of things. If you go down to paragraph 5, it talks about if your table decides to raise taxes, you must do it in the unit of mills. So it gives you the equation. So you're going to say we're going to raise taxes by 1 mil. That will give you 150,000 in new revenue. Okay? That's your unit. You can raise it by 5 mils, and that'll be, I don't know, whatever it is. I can't do that. Paragraph 6 on the back. If you want to cut services, you're like, we're going to have to cut some of these areas so that we can make this budget work. Again, this gives you a formula. So we're simplifying all of this down. One FTE, one full-time employee, it's about 100,000. All right? So if you say we're just going to cut one employee from every department, I don't know what you do, but this is the equation for how to do it. And then finally, paragraph 7. We have, by state law, we are supposed to have a reserve fund of, I think, 7% of our general fund. It's a rainy day fund. It's our savings account. Well, guess what? We have an extra 100,000 above that 7%. It's one-time money. Can't hire an FTE because it's not there next year, but it's something to work with. So that's all in here. So you have your numbers for your revenue. You've got your baseline increases. You've got your equations. Missoula is a growing city. To just do that, we'll provide a level, we will basically maintain our level of service. But remember, it's a growing city. You have new requests. These are your new requests, and I'll talk through them with you right now. First one is our IT department, okay, our technology folks. They are so overburdened, they're having to spend a lot of time on doing overtime. So we need to hire another person. We're spending $40,000 a year on overtime, but if we hire another person, the cost will be $80,000, but we're gonna save that $40,000 in overtime. We're at a tipping point in there. Number two, Public Works needs 2 new FTEs as well as 2 snowplows because we've had so many complaints about not plowing roads. We're gonna up the capacity there and get out there and get those residential districts, you know, Higgins Reserve, they get plowed, but we're really gonna hit the residential districts hard. Throughout the rest of the year, they're gonna be working filling potholes, they'll be doing chip seal. We can always use more capacity. So that's a new request. The snow plows are one time only, but the FTEs will be ongoing. Guess what? You can fund that from the road district because it's roads, okay? Police, their Kevlar vests have expired. They are no longer bulletproof. They are not covered under warranty. We need 110 new Kevlar vests for a total of $220,000. We also, and this is pretty much all based on truth. I've modified it and simplified it down. We did a staffing study. Remember the summer of 2020, defund the police, all of that discussion? We did a staffing study. How many police should we have for a city our size and demographics and et cetera, taking all those factors into account. And they said, and this is true, we're at about the right level, but we needed to modify our shifts. We needed less police on at certain times and more on at other times. So we did that. And this is also true, we need 2 more police vehicles in order to make that shift work. So, a lot cheaper to buy a vehicle than to hire another police officer. This is the good news, but for police vehicles are also expensive. You have to put extensive computer systems in them. So $200,000 for 2 vehicles, police vehicles. Number 4, Parks is requesting money to redo the Missoula tennis courts, okay? This is actually based on Playfair Park. We had this a few years ago. I was a tennis parent and everyone kept walking up to me saying, Gwen, do something. So this is fun being on city council sometime. The tennis courts, because of our freeze-thaw cycle, asphalt tennis courts last anywhere from 15 to 19 years. These got to 20 years, we would patch them and all of that. We need to replace those tennis courts now. This is where all of the tennis tournaments for all of high school take place for Western Montana, and this is where the high schools practice, and the schools will pitch in some, but frankly they just don't have a lot of money. So there's information in there about how that will work. It can be financed, and we can pay debt service of $80,000 a year for 10 years to get those tennis courts done. All right, and guess what? That can be pulled from Parks District. It's a Parks thing. Paragraph 5, Missoula Aging Services is requesting $70,000 because they have an increased demand for Meals on Wheels. Montana is one of the grayest states in the West. We have an aging population. And I don't know how much you know about Meals on Wheels and Missoula Aging Services. Huge need there. It is a vital service. So they're requesting money. The county will pay $30,000. The request to the city is $70,000. Number 6, sewer line running underneath the operations building for Parks. There's a broken sewer line, actively leaking sewage. We live on top of an aquifer. Okay, $150,000 to repair, one time only. That, for simplicity's sake, that's going to come from the general fund. Probably would be a utility, but we're going to put it in the general fund just to make this exercise work tonight. And then finally, number 7, due to the windstorm of July 2024, if you remember that, many trees in public right-of-way were lost. To get those replanted, $550,000, one time only. That can come from the Parks Fund. So what I'm going to do is have the 3 people at that small table disperse and join tables that only have 5 people. And then if our city councilors and mayor want to sit at a table, you can answer questions. can answer informational questions, but it is up to you to work through this and try to come to some level of consensus on how you're going to close the gap, what you're going to do, what new requests, if any, you will fulfill.
It's sweating, my phone is sweating.
Etc. And then we're going to have folks report in. Kalina, what's our time frame? It's 7:20 right now.
I would say, like we can check in maybe around 8.
8 o'clock.
Need more time. And
Try and come to some level of consensus by 8 o'clock. You are city council, all right? What are you going to do with the budget? So, and if you have questions, we will have folks at your table to answer those questions, all right? Okay, guys.
You keep doing your math. Yeah. Ignore this teacher.
Okay, the test is over. Turn the test over. No more bubbles. I hope this was not too frustrating. We did find a mistake, and we told most of you about it. But in general, the point of this exercise is to kind of show you the framework that we work within, the challenges that we have. Demand for services. You saw all of our presentations. There's a lot of need out there, and we're trying to, people that go to public service are pleasers. We want to do the right thing. So the budget is the foundational linchpin for all of our city services. So you had to see if you were going to maintain service. Can you meet the baseline increase of that 3% increase in cost of living? Increase for our collective bargaining agreements, and then we have the new requests on top of it. So what I'd like to do is just have each table present with where you wound up on this whole thing, what kind of consensus.
It's a new request.
Does anyone want to start? We start on this side over here, and I think this will come all over. There's a long part.
I'm retired.
Here you go.
As cognitive science.
We didn't actually get to the part where we were balancing anything. We had a lot of opinions about these new requests. So for the IT, we didn't fund it. We thought that the city could get a managing service agreement with an IT company, and then you would save on salary and benefits. Or you could get an internship with an employee through U of M or Missoula College. The public works for the snow plows and the employee, we thought that you could hire one employee and then you could get one new snow plow, since I don't think we're supposed to factor in the fact that we just got 2. But you could finance it over 15 years. And then the police requests, the vests, we went back and forth on this, but we did decide, we thought we could share, but then we had disagreements on sharing. So the life of the vest is 10 years, so we thought you could buy them all but finance over 10 years. And then we did okay to buy 2 new cars. Ready? For the police cars, yes. The tennis courts. What did we ultimately? I don't know. We went back and forth in this one. My opinion is they can go to play card. Right. So, or you can charge the $80,000 to the schools for the debt service annually. The aging services, we didn't fund, but we thought that they, since they're a 501(c), they could fundraise money for the $70,000. And then the sewer line, since the city's deductible is $10,000, we only financed $10,000, and then the rest would be covered by insurance. We have a lot of insurance people at our table. The windstorm, the trees. Well, we had a couple different, we thought maybe you could do like you do with the sidewalks and have the homeowners be part of, contributing to the replacement of the trees, or you could do 20% replacement initially and then 10% every year after that. And then the trees would be different years, kind of like you do with like computers or whatever, you know, you kind of phase them in so not everything is the same age.
That's a good plan.
And deer new trees. Different kinds.
So, really thoughtful, and yeah, you're looking at like how do you leverage things, how do you stretch things out, and I think we do a lot of that. But really interesting hearing those thoughts. What about the fact that you're only going to get $1 million in newly taxable and to just meet baseline at 1.56 million? How are you going to how are you going to close that? Are you just raising taxes and for the things that you've done, you're raising taxes?
Partially, yes. We didn't really get to that far. We had a lot of debate. We had a lot of debate on the new request, so we didn't actually balance anything. Sorry. It defeats the purpose, doesn't it?
No, it's a good exercise to see, and trying to work through those new requests. A lot of them are very sympathetic, and you want to, we love our community, so we want to see things happen. So awesome. Thank you so much for that. That was great. Any questions for the group, or we go on to the next? Can we go to the one in the corner? And
We had a slight Enron error going on back here. We had a small accounting error. We did not account for about $1 million of the general fund deficit. So if anybody wants to talk to benefactors from sort, we would greatly appreciate $1 million. Pretending like we did not miss that, we had a couple goals in mind. Our goal was to balance the budget, maintain service, and grant a few of the requests. We decided we were just going to max out the mill levies, so that would have given us $1,170,000. And since our general fund deficit, we've now decided is only $560,000 now. That was going to leave us with a surplus of $610,000. We prioritized a couple of the special requests that we thought were most important. Sewer because of the aquifer, aging because we can't ban our elderly, IT because the overtime guys cost us a lot of money, and with the police, we thought the vests were perhaps more important than the new cars. So we thought, minus $2 million that went missing, that would have us a surplus of $90,000 that we would chuck back into the rainy day fund. And Parks and Roads looked like they both had deficits of $100,000, and everybody's just going to have to mill the heck out of those to pay for them too. But that seems relatively small in comparison to the general fund deficit.
Great. Local spending out of control.
I'm going to hear all about that on next door app.
Crazy city council does it again. Awesome. Okay, thank you. Any questions? That I think covered it all.
Well, if we had an insurance person, we would have been way better.
We didn't allow that kind of creativity.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, the insurance angle. Let's go find some insurance premiums to buy. Start pulling it in.
Yeah.
Okay, can we go to this table next? Whoever is your presenter, whoever's first. There we go.
Okay, we were pretty ruthless. We weren't accepting very many of these new proposals. Three we partially did. We were buying 2 new police vehicles. We are fixing that sewer line, and we're paying $100,000 for some new trees, but not the full $550,000 request. And so in our math, that led to us having $910,000 that we had to come up with, and with a little bit of rounding, that was 6 mills. And in our math, that equals, I gotta get to my calculator, $8.10 additional per $100,000 value of your home. We felt like that was pretty reasonable, but then I did a little lobbying to do a 1% decrease in across the board in services and supplies to get closer to a balanced budget. So then it would be like $2 per $100,000 in taxable We were really trying to push on the balanced budget. We were also just trying to be real about what new proposals we could keep or not, but felt like keeping the staffing that we have on hand, trusting our staff, and the 3% wage increase was
I just should make a reference to Elon Musk, but I'm not going to go there. But that, yeah, it is this big balancing and how do you maintain services well, and the new requests are really hard. They're really, really hard. This table, we have someone.
Yeah, it's almost on quarter. Let her talk slow.
Well, we spent quite a lot of time just figuring out the numbers, I guess, and so we only focused on the general fund. We did not spend very much time on roads and parks. So we were just curious if we did everything, including the max mill, where would we be? And we found we had an $110,000 deficit still. So if we said, okay, let's do the max mill, which is 7.8, and either fund only 75 vests or cut one full-time employee. And I think our table felt that 75 vests instead of 110 was sort of worth that cut, so then that gets us balanced in the general fund. I think those vests do get pretty sweaty, but they can share. Thank you. All right, how about you guys?
Right.
So the request that we looked at, we said yes to the snow plows and 2 guys, said no to the vest, no to the IT. We would get 1 new police vehicle. We said yes to the parks request for the tennis courts, yes to the aging services, yes to the sewer line, and only half the trees. So when we looked at parks in the parks district, we said if we did half the trees and the tennis court at $80,000 and the $200,000 for the inflation, less the $100,000 that we got for growth, we said that came out to be roughly $405,000. So we said instead of covering that with 3 mills, we would cover that with 1 mill, and then we said you have to take the 2 others out of the purchase services. So we reduced that from 1.4 to 1.1 million. And we did something similar for the road district. We said that we would take the 300,000, but to cover that with half of the reduction in supplies by 150,000. So together there's 2 mills there for roads and park district. And then for the overall general fund, we did something similar. We added everything up. We added everything up and then said so that came out to 5.5 million as the overall service supplies and stuff like that. And we said everyone had to reduce it by, roughly 400,000. That would be split evenly by each department based upon what their service supply is. So mayor's office was going to cut like $300 from theirs versus the police would cut more. So that gave us, we said it came down to 3 mills there, to cover the remaining amount that came up, plus 2 mills from the road and park for an additional, whatever that is, 5 mills.
Okay.
Covering those things.
Okay. So, and I'm hearing some common threads here, which is really interesting. So yeah, that was very thoughtful. Thanks. I'm going to tell the mayor and city councilors, after we're done with these tables, I thought I'd hand the mics over to you guys so that you could, it's really interesting hearing it because we have to live it. And so this is like a little test group and we kind of get to hear how you approach things. And so just think about that. I'll turn the mic over to you guys. We have time tonight, I think. Okay. All right, let's go to the last group. How do I say it correctly?
I'd like to quote Captain Kirk. This was a
Kobayashi Maru.
Kobayashi Maru. I can't say it, but I identified it. So, We fully funded police and fire, and every other department took a 7% cut. We did not fulfill any of the requests for additional, but we also did raise taxes. Here's the numbers. Sorry, you know, I'm a constituent.
No, really interesting to hear, and that is, there's a lot of different approaches. So, Robert, did you want to add on to that?
I just wanted to say, I think from what everybody says, I can see where it's a battle for you all in the city council, because in some, yes, there were some common threads, but some people thought one thing was more important, and other people thought another thing was more important. And so you can't please all the people all the time, can you?
And I think, I'm going to have other counselors speak to this too, but I think we have a keen awareness of raising taxes is a huge hardship at this point. But also, we've got some services that are, like, public safety is life or death sometimes. Like, we have to do it and do it well enough to be providing a certain level of service that people expect in this day and age and that are going to make a difference. And, you know, we just went through that with the fire levy. Response times make a big difference. So do you guys want to comment?
Yeah, it was interesting to hear all of your scenarios and also kind of to touch with some of the tables that I chatted with. One of the tables there, you guys in the back had a great suggestion, and it really made me think about the process for us. And they had suggested that next year we have, you may want to add to this since it was your idea, but that we have either city council or heads of departments come in and lobby for the things that they want. Because that's what happens with us, right? So, and one of you asked, one of the tables, it may have been the same table, asked about, okay, does everyone need their own vest, or is that just the MOPE and the police department ask, or is that just for how many people are on duty? And I was like, I don't know, this is like a made-up thing, so I don't really know. But in reality, if they came and they asked us, there would be a number. And then Mike added, well, their vests need to fit them, right? I mean, and then I'm thinking about all the police officers that we see that are in here, and there are a lot of different sizes. There are some, you know, small women, and there's some very, very large guys. So those are not interchangeable. I was thinking about the police cars, right? So we can't do our schedule that kind of has saved money if we don't have enough cars for certain shifts, right? So those two kind of play against each other. And, you know, so the idea of the lobbying piece, and the, you know, we'll say, okay, we want to cut this, and, you know, Chief probably will be like, I've got a comment, you know, and then he comes up and he says, well, you know, that's part of our collective bargaining agreement. Or, you know, this is what we've agreed with the unions. So, you know, it really is, as we're going through this, and I'm sorry, I probably wasn't very helpful at the tables, because I was like, I don't know, I didn't put this together, right? What is that? You know, so, but it did, just listening to some of the conversation, it made me think, like, we have those conversations, right? And then sometimes someone from the department gets up and they're like, well, I feel really, you know, when we get called in for, and I said this to one of the tables, like, if there is an active shooter situation, right, and we're calling people, and everyone needs to be in a Kevlar vest, right? We cannot ask our first responders to go in and be willing to go into these situations if they're not protected. That's my personal opinion. We can't ask people to do that. There's a fascinating article on this that I read. But anyway, those are just I really appreciate kind of hearing people's thoughts and how we went through this. And I love the idea of, like, having people lobbying and answer questions about it.
Mike, do you want to comment?
No, I don't actually. So the interesting thing is going around the tables, and you know, there was a budget conversation a couple of years ago, and it was terrible because one of the council members basically made an amendment to eliminate a line item that would have fired someone who was in the room lobbying. And it was brutal because the person had to basically stand up and explain their job, which is never the intent. Like, the way the budget works is the mayor presents council her kind of executive budget, and then we can tweak it and stuff like that. But if we were looking at something where we were doing major staff reductions, that's not just gonna happen on council floor. Like, that's something that needs serious thought. And I mean, we're seeing that in the federal government right now, where you can't just snap your finger and say, well, we can do this with 30% less. Like, you need to figure out what that means. And so these budget exercises are always fascinating. I also always love to hear the creativity that different groups have on, you know, how we're going to pay for things. And sometimes very accurate. I mean, like we, for instance, on our police cruisers, we have a replacement program, and so it's a few every year, a few every couple of years, and it's, you know, built in, and we do bond certain things out over time and kind of plan for those payments. So, you know, the exercise is basic so that we can so you can understand it, but it really does kind of, I think, illustrate that there's no one easy answer. People like to say there's an easy answer, but it just really isn't.
I have a question. It came up at our table a few times that a lot of these requests are potentially one-time expenses, but a mill is forever. No?
No, so like a mill levy is different than a mill, because they make property taxes as confusing as possible for residents and elected officials to understand. But basically, Dale could go into this in much more detail, but we have to levy mills every year, which is how we collect property taxes. So that number can fluctuate every year. But then there are like voted on levies, like the fire levy, which basically says we will levy this many every year because we voted on it. So that's like permanent. It's not.
But if you're raising taxes, if you're raising taxes for the general fund, if you're raising mills in the general fund, next year, that's part of the base then. Okay, but if you've hit the mill cap, you may or may not have any leeway the next year. It's not a valuation year, things aren't going up. We have no wiggle room then. I know that you two wanted to talk, and we'll finish with the right there. Just slipped in there. I just wanted to you know, just thinking about the process that you guys went through, and I know that you've been in here for multiple weeks learning things, but our budget process for council is that the departments will come in, and this got changed and improved under Mayor Davis the first year, but the departments come in and they tell us what their priorities are, they tell us what they need, and then we give feedback to the mayor. This was the change. We give feedback to the mayor saying, these are our priorities, or we agree with these priorities, or here are some amendments we have, here's something we don't think we need to do. But she has 12 of us, right? There are 12 of us. You don't have 12 people at any one of your tables. Keep that in mind. So it's like if you added your tables together and then tried to kind of get along. So then, you know, so she presents our budget, and then we can still make amendments to that budget, or we can pass that budget. But again, we have 12 people, and sometimes we stay, I mean, what was our latest budget meeting, 3 a.m., that we were going back and forth about everyone's different amendments. We have improved that process because no one makes good decisions at 3 a.m., but she does, actually. I don't like making decisions after like 9. But, so I just think that process is interesting, because it's kind of similar to some of this.
Yeah. When we wait till 3 a.m., Amber was remote on the East Coast, so it was actually 5 a.m.
It was 5 a.m.
There she was.
I actually turned my camera off. I put my head. I'm just going to say yes or no.
Terrible. All those years of a night owl have like trained me for this. You know, similar comments to my colleagues in terms of it's interesting to hear, you know, one table is like, yep, levy all the mills, and we're gonna put the money in requests, and then the other table is like, yeah, slashing everything. And then you know, and it's, you know, it's an exercise to show kind of the complexity, and hopefully you kind of saw a little bit of that. And as various things were being said, I was like, yeah, well, I don't think we can really do that, but okay, nice idea. And also the things that I have learned over my time on council. I mean, hopefully you guys feel that way just in your short period of time being exposed to the various departments and learning new things about the city, it's like, I had no idea about the urban canopy in, you know, like, yeah, we have trees, they're beautiful, lovely, you know, but no, there is, like, from an economic standpoint, there actually, like, there's a valuation for what our urban canopy is worth, the, like, you know, climate, the heating, all of the various things. I feel like I'm constantly learning new things, which is great, but then it's like, okay, well, we need to replant the trees. Well, yeah, we do, because wow, I now know all of this stuff about why these trees are so important, other than just like they're pretty. And so that then makes it even more complicated. And then, as Amber said, I mean, we all also come to get with our own, you know, value sets. And you know, I represent public safety and health. That's the committee that I chair of, and it's because I care really a lot about the police and fire department, because that's the family in which I grew up in. And so, like, I would be, you know, the one basically, no, we are fine, everyone in Keller Nest, and we are absolutely doing this. And like lobbying my fellow council members to be like, no, as Amber said, they need to fit, and everyone can't share, and you know, but then Amber, who is very, you know, environmentally focused, and be like, great, but we need all the trees. So, you know, it's difficult and hard decisions are made, and then, you know, when you do see the people who actually do the jobs, and who, when you're like, okay, it's a 7% cut across the board, well, that actually means people are going to be losing their jobs, and I know the flip side to that is like, well, I can't afford the taxes anymore, and so that's a constant tension point that you're under making these tough decisions. Because our job at the City of Missoula is to provide services to the citizens, and it's really hard that some of those things don't have a like value, or you can't run the city like you run a business. Because theoretically, like 911 is just something that we need to have, and when you call, police and fire need to show up and make sure that they are rendering aid, and you can't really quantify that. And you can't say, well, I'm going to get a return on my investment for those new firefighters. Well, that's just not the way that, you know, municipalities are run. So, with that, I hand it to
All right, well, I thank you. I mean, it was really interesting to hear everybody's presentations tonight. Well done, good exercise. What would I want to add? Let's see, I would want to add that the reality with local government is that we are the government closest to the people. So we're going to see you in our neighborhoods, in the grocery store, in school, kids' games. And so if we decide to cut positions, if we decide to ratchet back services, you're going to feel that, we're going to feel that. And we're accountable to you so directly that I would say that, you know, it's such a glaring difference of what we are seeing happen in the country right now. You know, I see a lot of comments that flash up on social media or what have you that says like, you should just doge this, right? Well, imagine that situation if we were to do something like that, that would affect the way that you function in your community or the way your kids get to school. And so it's a really, I just say that because it's just so close to us and it's intimate in that way. One time I was on KGVO Talkback Radio and somebody said, the city should not take on any debt. Now, as Dale mentioned earlier, we don't take on debt to fund operations, but we do take on debt for capital needs, so infrastructure, things of that nature, and that includes, you know, vehicles and things like that. But imagine if that was you personally. You said, I'll never take on any debt. If you had to save your whole life to buy a home, you would never probably buy that home. And so that's the reality with a municipality too, is that we have very real actions today that you and I need to function in the city, that through the ability to leverage bonds or debt, we can actually get the services that we need to provide essential services to you today, and then we pay that off over time. Those are some of the decisions that we balance. That debt payment, however, then just like your mortgage payment goes into your budget, you know, your rent or your mortgage payment goes into your annual budget, well, so does our debt payment. We're actually quite good on the debt side of things. We don't take out a lot of debt there for various reasons, but I just thought I would add that as a contextual piece. Beyond that, I think I just really appreciate how much this has, you know, given some creativity and some thought around just the challenge that this poses for us all the time. One of the things that we have to think about is, if that's that one position that we eliminate, what is the thing that is not going to happen? And so like that 7% across the board cut, to some degree, it's like, well, that feels fair, almost equitable. Because we're just going to do the 7% across, you know, hit. But then some departments that would be the entire staff. Let's say, for example, our houses programs. That might be that entire team that does that work. And that doesn't necessarily jive with what the community is asking the city to step up and do. And so we try to balance where our communities drive and our goals with trying to really balance what we can do in terms of the cost to our residents, but then also the value in the service. And that's one thing that we've been focused on, is to really continue to help articulate the value in the service that we provide through the tax base, through what you did today. Because ultimately, when you think about your daily activities, I think we get a pretty good deal for actually what we pay for here locally in terms of what happens every day in our lives. So that would be my sales pitch for FY26's budget. Thank you.
I don't know if there's questions, Robert? You have questions?
Yeah, just a couple things.
Comments? Comments too?
Wait, one of them just went right out of my head. Is there an assumption, it's like in many cases about negotiation, when the departments come in and say this is what we want, then maybe they're going to say, well, let's just ask for this, and then maybe we'll at least get this. I mean, it sounds like all those bits, very important. Some of those things, you know, Jenny didn't go through the specifics of what we went through on that other stuff, but you know, we said maybe just give them half of this or whatever. And then the other part of my question is, so with the creative ideas, you know, we heard about insurance over here. Are these things that can really be considered? We mentioned, for example, on the tennis court, we said, no, we're not going to fund that. I mean, people give millions and millions and millions to the grids. Let's have a fundraiser, or let's put a little bit of money towards the city having some kind of campaign to raise money for the tennis courts, and have it come, you know, completely, and you know, and then just on top of that, like, does anybody ever die and just leave a lot of money to the city?
So first, I think the out-of-box ideas are great. And I think we all constantly are working on that. We work with a lot of community partners, nonprofits, private sector, anytime we can increase capacity. And I think it's a pretty common theme in this day and age, nothing gets done without partnerships. So there's a lot of partnerships out there. The tennis courts, I was integrally involved in that. My youngest was a senior playing tennis at Hellgate, and for 1 year there was no tennis due to the pandemic. The next year we went out there, the courts had cracked. They were on the cusp, they cracked, and I had all these parents coming up to me saying, Gwen, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna handle this? So it was a thing. And for all of our high school tennis, it has to be competition level tennis courts to host the big tournaments. And unlike Bozeman, our MCPS does not have their tennis courts attached to the high school. So it's a partnership with MCPS. We spent a lot of time talking with MCPS. I will say their finances are extremely challenging. And I'm going to tell you this too, if they put in X amount of dollars for the tennis courts, what pocket is that coming out of? It's the same pocket, it's property taxes. It's nice for them to take the political hit instead of us, but we wound up doing that. And it just needed to be done, and we did it. It's the right thing to do. So we're always looking for partnerships, we're always looking for out-of-the-box scenarios. And as for department heads lobbying, I don't think you're a very good department head if you don't lobby and ask. That's your job, to advocate for your department, to make it the best department possible. And it's our job to look at the 23 requests from any one department and figure out what 2 or 3 we can probably satisfy, and what's the most important, and what's really going to make a difference. So, I mean, we get lots of new requests.
Put it in order. Like, the other thing is if you are coming to us, we ask you to rank your top, your requests in order. Prioritize them.
Yeah.
And for those of us, I think everyone who's in this room now has been on council long enough. Like Brian Hensel has come in multiple years and been like, I need a new freaking snowplow. And I would be like, sorry, we can't do it this year. And he'd come back and be like, it's not getting any better. Sorry, just can't do it this year. And then the next year we're finally like, okay, hey, instead of buying a giant new snowplow, we're going to buy 2 smaller snowplows that then allow for some more maneuverability in some of the side streets. And so it's like, okay, we can't do the big one, but and then it's like, okay, well, we're just going to drive those snowplows. I don't have now the FTEs for them. So the request too, right? I mean, it's not coming to us with, you know, the wish list that you put, it's not a wish list, like, I mean,
Needs-based, all
Yes,
the
last
were
year.
mandated, yeah, part of our priority-based budget, do I need this microphone? I'll use it, yes. We did change to, instead of coming with a wish list, because at one point, like, the departments were like, I'm gonna put it all out there. And, you know, and it was, you know, the reality of where we are, I mean, just in terms of, you know, living after a 40-year, you know, high of inflation. I mean, inflation, as you saw in our budget presentation, has just eaten up our budget authority. And so it's like, what are your absolute necessary budget items? That's what you bring forward, and that's the top line thing in your budget presentation. So for every department, that was all streamlined. We started with having every single program that has like an accounting code associated with it. They had to give me like a one-page tear sheet on like, what does this do? Is it a mandate? Is it a federal mandate? A state mandate? Is it grant funded? Is it tax funded? Just so we can start to actually get a handle on like all the things that are happening across the city, because there's a lot of activities. And then, and coming in, it was, yeah, very needs-based. And of course, you know, if you're a good lobbier, everything's a need. But no, I mean, it was really like a base budget. What's your base budget? So in that case, it would be a base budget plus like a 3% increase for your staff, for example. And then an inflationary increase on what other goods or services, those kinds of things. And then, you know, potentially some other opportunities for some new stuff. But, and then the other thing I would say is a great way that Amber organized the amendment process was that it was an agreed upon, council voted on the budget process. So me bringing my executive budget at the end was a suggestion I brought, and then the schedule that they had put together was also a way in which to organize amendments. So rather than people bringing amendments all night long until 3 in the morning, it was like you actually have to have your amendments in by a certain date, and time for the staff to evaluate what that means. So if an amendment comes in that's a cut or an add, what is the actual operating implication of that? So I thought it was a really well thought out process, and it's just getting better all the time.
I'm gonna turn this back to Kalina, who's talked a lot up here. But I wanted to just say thank you so much for participating in this, and this is very, very thoughtful cohort. The questions over the weeks have been amazing, and I just want to say thank you, because I think it's a valuable program, and you guys just brought it and engaged and gave it 100%, and I really appreciate that. But Kalina.
Thank you so much. Ditto everything that Gwen said. This has been a really wonderful cohort this year. I super appreciate you all coming out, taking 2.5, 3 hours out of your Thursday nights to come learn about the city, learn about the functions, the services, and meet the people who do the work too. It's a huge highlight of my job to be able to help put this on. So super thankful for you all being excited about local government. Woohoo! I wanted to say we have some wonderful certificates because you all deserve it. You all have been amazing throughout this entire 6 weeks.